Grisly crimes from past. The death of the Romanovs. The Romanovs had ruled Russia for 400 years. By the end of 19th century, their empire stretched from the borders of Poland to the Sea of Japan. But even that was not enough for Nicholas II. He tried to extend his empire farther in the east, aiming to seize China, Tibet, and Persia. His ambitions were thwarted by defeat in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-05. This weakened him at home, and he was forced to give up his autocratic power to become a constitutional monarch answerable, in theory, to a parliament of Duma. However, this did not suit him, so he allied himself with right-wing extremists and in 1907 dissolved the Duma. His ambition to extend his empire into the Balkans led in some measures to World War I. Though when it broke out, he did try and stop the confrontation between the great powers. He took control of the war effort while his wife Alexandria handled domestic government. She fell under the influence of the mad monk Rasputin, who became so unpopular he was assassinated. Nicholas's mishandling of the war led to riots in 1917, following which his government lost control in St. Petersburg, then Russia's capital. Politicians from the Duma formed a provincial government. Meanwhile, Bolshevik workers and soldiers began to form themselves into committees known as Soviets. The generals had lost confidence in Nicholas. When the Duma insisted that he abdicate, they conquered, seeing it as the only way to prevent civil war. On 15th of March 1917, Nicholas abdicated in favor of his brother, the Grand Duke Michael. The 13-year-old Tsarevich Alexei was too young to take over and suffered from hemophilia. However, on 16th of March, the Duma decided the formation of the Soviets meant that the continual of the monarchy in any form was impossible, and they persuaded Grand Duke Michael not to assume the throne. On 21st of March, Nicholas was arrested, as was Alexandra and the rest of the family. Although they were allowed to stay in their palace, they were guarded by soldiers who had suffered because of Nicholas' incompetent leadership in the front. The provincial government arranged for the Tsar and his family to go into exile in Britain. The British government agreed, but King George V, the Tsar's cousin, stepped in, asking how the Tsar intended to support himself in Britain. The socialist movement was strong in the UK. The war was dragging on, and George feared giving sanctuary to the hated Tsar might bring the British monarchy down too. In August, the provincial government moved the Tsar and his family to Tobolsk, a provincial backwater between the Urals and western Siberia. There, they would be safe from the turbulent politics of St. Petersburg. The people in Tobolsk were courteous to the Romanovs, as were most of the troops that guarded them there. They would even play cards with Nicholas and the children. However, in November 1917, the royal family's fate was sealed when the Bolsheviks overthrew the provincial government. In January 1918, they closed the Duma, as they only control a quarter of the votes there. Furthermore, in March, they signed a peace treaty with the Germans, ending Russia's involvement in World War I. With no voice in the Duma, non-communists had no way to oppose Bolshevism. Civil war was therefore inevitable, and it broke out in spring of 1918. The Bolshevists had already shown they were ruthless. Many of them had suffered under Nicholas's repressive regime. It seemed unlikely that he could survive. Bolshevism was not widespread in Siberia, except for in one place: Yekaterinburg, the capital of the Red Urals. The Soviets there had nationalized the mines even before Moscow had fallen to the Bolshevists. The Yekaterinburg commissioners were determined that the Romanovs would not escape. The party leadership in Moscow sent for the Tsar, but on his way there he was intercepted by an armed detachment of Bolsheviks from Yekaterinburg, who seized the royal family and took them there. They were greeted by a large crowd shouting insults, and the Bolshevik authorities had to threaten the use of force before the crowd would let them through safely. The Romanovs were taken to a house that had been confiscated from a wealthy merchant called Yepetev, which was now known as the House of Special Purpose. A number of royal aides were taken and shot on suspicion of being involved with counter-revolutionary plots to free the royal family from there. Instead of being guarded by soldiers, the Romanovs were watched day and night by a special Red Guard recruited from the local factories. The Tsar and his family were not permitted to talk to their guards, who were rude and abusive and pilfered their belongings. Nicholas was denounced as a bloodsucker. Female members of the royal family were not allowed to the lavatory by themselves, but had to be escorted by a male guard. The walls of the house was covered with lewd graffiti, a lot of showing Rasputin and Alexandria having sex in various positions while Nicholas looked on. One piece of doggerel went, "Our Russian Tsar called Nick was dragged off the throne by his prick." As the war against the counter-revolutionaries heated up, the language of Lenin and the other leading Bolsheviks turned increasingly to class war and violence. The words purge and cleansing were soon being used to justify murder. In Yekaterinburg, local anarchists demanded that the Bolsheviks hand over the Tsar so they could kill him. There was at least one armed attempt to abduct Nicholas and assassinate him. After that, the anarchists were rounded up. The Tsar received several letters from army officers who said that they were organizing an escape. This may have been part of a plot that would allow the guards to kill the Romanovs while they were fleeing, but they built up the family's hope. On more than one occasion, they stayed up all night fully clothed, believing they were about to be saved. Fearing that there may indeed be plots to free the Tsar, the deputy head of the Yekaterinburg Cheka or Secret Police, Yalov Yurovsky, was appointed head of the Romanovs Guards. He was a convicted communist and a cruel man. He brought with him Gregorio Nikulin, who Yurovsky described as his son and who was certainly the executor of his will. Nikulin was an experienced killer. His first act when he arrived at the House of Special Purpose was to shoot Prince Dolgorukov, Nicholas's trusted aide-de-camp. As soon as Yurovsky arrived, he fired the men who were pilfering from the Romanovs and brought in his own men from the Cheka. These men were not known to the locals and were referred as Latvians. Not surprising, as ethnic Latvians played an important role in the Cheka. In fact, they were Germans, Austrians, Hungarian Magyars, and Russians. Discipline was tightened. In Moscow, Lenin was making plans to put Nicholas on trial. He wanted the proceedings broadcast on radio across Russia, with Leon Trotsky as prosecutor. But things were turning against the Bolshevists. Many people saw their peace treaty with Germany as an act of treason, cowardly at the very least, and there began to be strikes against Bolshevist rules. Even the revolutionary writer Maxim Gorky was condemning Lenin and Trotsky for having betrayed socialism. There were other threats too. Allied troops had arrived at Murmansk. The Germans had taken over Vladivostok, and 30,000 Czech soldiers rebelled when the communists tried to disarm them. The Czech Legion moved eastwards down the Trans-Siberian Railway in the hope that ships would pick them up from Vladivostok and deliver them to the Western Front. They took Samara while an anti-Bolshevist government was formed in Omsk. Yekaterinburg was midway between Sahara and Omsk and looked set to fall. A trial would now be impossible. It is not known who gave the order for the execution. It could have come from the leadership in Moscow. The communists in Yekaterinburg still talked of arranging a trial, but that may have been a bluff. Trial could simply have been a code word for execution. Nevertheless, in the House of Special Purpose, preparations were made for the killing. An Orthodox priest was allowed to visit the Romanovs. The family sang hymns together and prayed. Yurovsky claimed that an order came at 6 p.m. on 16th of July 1918, telling him to exterminate the Romanovs, though he said it came from Perm, not Moscow. Yurovsky was none too fussy though. He already referred to his Cheka guards as the execution squad and told his chief of staff P.J. Medvedez to bring revolvers that morning, as he planned to execute the whole family that night. The family was told that they were going to be moved, so they should not go to bed that night. At 2 a.m., they were summoned to the basement. There were some disorders in the town, and they would be safer down there. Once they were safely in the basement, Yurovsky, Nikulin, and 10 other men entered. Yurovsky read a death warrant. The lorry that was going to carry away their bodies revved outside to cover the sound of the shooting. Yurovsky pulled a revolver and shot the Tsar at point-blank range. With a second revolver, he shot the Tsarevich Alexei, who had just turned 14. The boy groaned in pain, and Yurovsky emptied the rest of the bullets into him. Alexandria and her 4 daughters fell to their knees while the other men opened up on them. Although 2 Hungarians refused to shoot the woman, the Tsar's doctor was also shot, along with his manservant troop. The Tsarina's maid Demodova was not hit by the first volley, so the men came with her with bayonets, which she sought to parry with a cushion. She died in agony. The children's spaniel, Jimmy, was also killed, his head smashed in with a rifle butt. The Tsar's daughter did not die immediately. They had sewn valuable jewelries inside their corsets to give them money in case they escaped, and the bullets ricocheted off it, leaving the girls in agony. The political commissioner, P.J. Ermakov, stood on the arms of the Grand Duchess Anastasia and stabbed her repeatedly with a bayonet. During the 1930s, he was wheeled out as a hero of the revolution, a role model for Soviet youth. The bodies were loaded onto the lorry, and Ermakov took them to some mine shaft nearby. The drunken guards there stripped the Grand Duchess to gloat over the young girls' naked bodies. When they burned the woman's clothes, to their surprise and delight, they found the jewelry. Then they threw the bodies down the mine, followed by grenades. Yurovsky was furious when he discovered that the guards had told the whole town where the Tsar and his family lay buried. The White Russians would take Yekaterinburg in a matter of days, and he had promised Moscow that the bodies would never be found. The next night, Yurovsky went back to the mine shaft with his most trusted men and recovered the Romanovs' bodies. The plan was to dump them down another deeper shaft, but the lorry got stuck in the mud on the way, so they buried them where they were. Just in case the Whites discovered the corpse, the bodies of Tsarevich Alexei and one of the women were buried separately. In addition, the faces of all the corpses were smashed and disfigured. This proved unnecessary, and it was not until 1976 that anyone suspected where the Romanovs were buried. Yurovsky reported to Moscow that the deed was done. However, the Bolshevists only announced that Nicholas had been killed. Alexandria and Alexia had been moved to a safe place. The official announcement said the authorities were not sure how the people would react to the murder of women and children. Immediately after the atrocity, witnesses came forward to say that Alexandria and her children were seen on a train on their way to Perm. More often, witnesses spoke of a young woman alone, clearly injured and traumatized. She was thought to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia. Soon after, reports said she was arrested by the Cheka, raped and murdered. Nevertheless, several young women turned up in the West claiming to have been Anastasia, though none managed to substantiate her claim. A man claiming to be Alexia and bearing some of the distinguishing mark of the Tsarevichs turned up in Baghdad, but he soon disappeared into obscurity. After the Tsar and his immediate family were murdered, the rest of their entourage, including their servants who had remained back in Tobolsk, were killed. The Grand Duke Michael had already been shot in Perm on 12th of June. The rest of the Grand Ducal party had been taken to Alapavsh, where on the day after the Tsar was killed, they too were murdered. They were taken by cart to nearby mine shafts and thrown in. The Grand Duke Sergius put up a fight and was shot dead first. The rest were thrown in alive. Afterwards, plank and dynamites were thrown in. When the bodies were recovered, they all had grave head wounds. Some died instantly, but some may have lived on for hours. The Czech captured Yekaterinburg on 25th of July. Almost immediately, they found the charred remains of the Romanov clothes and other possessions, and began an investigation. They quickly concluded that the entire family had been massacred. Or had they? Anastasia's remains were never found. Her whereabouts remained unknown, and what happened to her is much speculated upon. As the years passed by, the less likely it becomes that she will be found. The Anastasia mystery may remain unsolved forever. The abandoned mine serving as a mass grave near Yekaterinburg, we held the acidified remains of the Tsar, his wife, and 3 of their daughters were revealed in 1991. These remains were put at rest at Peter and Paul Fortress in 1998. The bodies of Alexia Nikolaevich and the remaining daughter, either Anastasia or her older sister Maria, were discovered in 2007. Her possible survival has been conclusively disproved. Scientific analysis, including DNA testings, confirm that the remains are those of the imperial family, showing that all 4 Grand Duchesses were killed in 1918. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and leave a comment, as it helps with YouTube algorithm to grow this channel. I regularly upload, so by subscribing, you will be notified of new materials. You will find similar contents in my other videos. Have a safe day. Signing off.